My father is a social worker, and my mother is a nurse. So since the day I was born, I was raised with the belief that I should do good things in the world. So I brought that belief here to the University of Iowa, and on this campus, in this very building, I learned skills and abilities and had experiences that led me to where I am today, about 10 years after my graduation, where I work as a social entrepreneur. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, a social entrepreneur is a person who tries to solve social problems with entrepreneurial skills. Let me give you some examples. So the most famous or notable, or one of the most notable social entrepreneurs of our current era is Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus is an economics professor in Bangladesh, and he saw in the late 1970s a problem that he wanted to solve. And he saw the economy of the world rising, but he also saw that billions were being left behind, particularly in the rural areas of poor countries like Bangladesh. And he came up with an idea, which on its face is a really stupid sounding idea, which is let's loan money to poor people that don't have any collateral and probably will never pay you back. He worked on this idea for 30 years and developed the idea of micro-lending. And that is if you could take $10, $20, $50, and you could give it to a poor person, primarily women. Sorry guys, they learned that women are better at this stuff. That not only would that woman invest that money in starting a business, that if you put her in a cohort with other women that kept accountability amongst them, that they in fact would pay that loan back about 96% of the time, which is actually better than probably commercial lending even in the United States. What they also found, or what Mohammed found, was that if you gave a woman a little bit of money and she started a business, the money that she made, she would first invest in her children, in health and education, which would bring up those children, which would bring up the family and the village and the state and eventually the country and hopefully the world. It took him 30 years to figure this out, but in 2006, Muhammad Yunus won the Nobel Peace Prize for the idea and his invention or the creation of the first microloan programs. That's one social entrepreneur. Scott Harrison was a party planner in New York City. Scott got paid a lot of money, 6 figures, to throw parties in New York for celebrities and socialites. His job was to create cool parties in the coolest venues for the coolest people in New York. He lived what seemed like a dream job because he threw parties in New York and he had his own condo, $1 million condo in Manhattan. And he woke up one day when he was 30 and he recognized that it seemed amazing, but he was completely unfulfilled. So he quit that job. He took a volunteer position on the Mercy Ship, which is a floating hospital that goes around the world to some of the most poor and rural areas to provide health care. In that journey, Scott discovered a big problem in the world that needed to be solved. The access to clean and safe drinking water. So Scott founded an organization called Charity Water, which raises money to build wells around the world to bring that access to clean and safe drinking water, recognizing that if you don't have clean water, you can't do anything. You can't work. You can't start a small business. You can't go to school. You can't take care of your kids. And Charity Water, to me, is one of the most amazing nonprofit organizations that's figured out how to really market and use the internet to connect people from around the world to help one another. Charity Water, since its beginning in 2006, has raised about $40 million to bring clean drinking water to 2.5 million people. Jacqueline Berglund from Minnesota. She saw a big problem in her state, in the state of Minnesota. It was hunger. In a country like the United States with so much wealth, how were their people still being hungry? So she did the next obvious step. She started a beer company. She started a beer company called Finnegan's that actually gives 100% of its proceeds to provide food for food shelters in the community in which the beer is sold. Founded in 2000, the organization has had a profound impact. In just the last year alone, they've donated 170,000 pounds of food to local food shelters. Even closer to home, Ben Milne, a graduate of the University of Northern Iowa who dropped out before he even reached the graduation stage. He started a company without a college degree to sell speakers on the internet. Before he was 21, it was making $1 million a year. When he looked down at the bottom of all the financials at the end of the year, he realized he was paying $45,000 a year in credit card fees. That didn't make a lot of sense to him. So he sold his speaker company, he moved to Des Moines, and he started a technology startup called TEDxUIowa that is trying to reinvent the way we move money, to create a new system outside the credit and debit system to move money, to make it easier for people like us to move money in the way that we move emails, in the way that we move our data and our social media. Ben has been lauded as one of the top innovators in the world. He's raised money from investors around the country, some of the top venture capitalist firms, including a university alumnus, Ashton Kutcher. Ben is reinventing an entire world, an entire industry that there's not one of you in this room that doesn't have some sort of card in your pocket that Ben is trying to make better. So, TEDxUIowa, since its founding just a few short years ago, has raised over $20 million in venture capital, has 80,000 users, and moves now somewhere in the realm of $50 million per month at last report. And they haven't been reporting that number in the last couple months, so it's probably much higher than that. So this is an example of social entrepreneurs at their best, 4 of them that I greatly admire and I think are doing really interesting work in the world to solve social problems. So the problem that I have with my own presentation standing up here is that when I was in your seat just 10 years ago, I couldn't make the logical jump. I'm sitting in this chair at college, and these guys are talking about venture capital and Ashton Kutcher and Nobel Peace Prizes and millions of dollars in manufacturing beer. I knew a little bit about manufacturing beer. That doesn't make, how do I get from my chair in college to do this stuff? So today, for the rest of my talk, I want to address that question. I want to talk about how do you become a social entrepreneur, because I believe in our generation. I think all generations want to make a difference, but there's something in the water that's got into a lot of us, especially the generation in college now, that you don't just want a job, you want to do something good in the world with that job and the work that you do. But how do you do it? How do you become a social entrepreneur? So I'm going to tell you my story about how I got there, but let's just think logically for a second. How would I become a social entrepreneur? About to graduate, want to do that work? Awesome. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go to Monster.com where they have 1 million jobs. So I went on Monster.com this morning and I searched social entrepreneur. It turns out there isn't a single job in 1 million search items that is social entrepreneur. That's a real screenshot right there. Try it. Get your phones out. I'm serious. Try it. You'll see. That's not a fake graphic. So how do you become a social entrepreneur? Well, it's not a traditional job. So first of all, you got to throw out all the traditional questions. The traditional questions you typically ask yourself, that I asked myself when I was in your seat as a student, were these 2 big questions that freak out a lot of people. And it's, what do I want to be when I grow up? Or it's, what do I want to do when I graduate? That's a really hard question. Anybody agree that that's a hard question? You've challenged? It's a tough one, right? So let's just get rid of those questions altogether. I give you permission to take those questions, kick them out the door, because I've got a better question. If you want to change the world, if you want to do social entrepreneur work, those questions don't work, because if you say, I want to be a social entrepreneur, I want to be a marketer, you search social entrepreneur or marketer on Monster, and then you just do that, but see, there aren't any jobs that are for social entrepreneurs. So here's what I suggest. Let's put another question to you. And that question is, what problem do you want to solve in the world? Like, what problem out there that you see just pisses you off? That makes you say, man, that's frustrating, or why does that even happen? or a problem you're so fascinated, why does that happen, and I really want to solve it. That's how you become a social entrepreneur, but you've got to find that problem. So I want to tell you very quickly how I found where I am today, 10 years out of college, full-time social entrepreneur on a company called Seed Here Studio that works to help entrepreneurs and creative people be more entrepreneurial and creative. But I want to take you on a journey. My journey didn't start with me sitting down saying I wanted to be a social entrepreneur. My story started with a party. So it was the summer of my first senior year at the university. And I was sitting around with a bunch of friends. We had all peaked a little early in college. I had been heavily involved in the student government. My friend was in the theater department, and he was in all the plays. He knew a lot of theater people. My other friend was an editor at the newspaper, and he knew all the journalist people. I had a friend who had a band, and he knew all the musicians in town. And we were hanging out, and we all realized that we had a year left of school, and we couldn't go any higher in our student organizations or respective sort of endeavors. And we were like, what are we going to do? I don't think we were going to go to class, but we were trying to figure out what we were going to do. And so we realized we had a problem, and that problem was that we knew a lot of interesting creative people, but they didn't know each other because we were all around campus, but people were siloed in their special areas. So we decided to throw a party. And that party was just like every other college party, except for halfway through, we asked people to go around and introduce themselves and tell people what they did. So my name is Andy. I love making films. My name is Mike, and I love volunteering. Eventually, we get to someone and say, oh, my name's Steve. I've got a band, and I'm looking for a drummer. And then eventually, inevitably, someone would go, my name is Mary, and, well, I'm a drummer, and I'm looking for a band. And people would start to connect and form around these ideas, and they'd come back to the party planners because we knew everyone, and they would say, well, we've got this band now, but we don't have anywhere to perform. So we looked around, and we said, So we rented a room in this very building, the Student Union. And we said, hey, 5 people from this party, you have 10 minutes to perform. You can do whatever you want. We're going to charge $5 to get in. We'll give that money to charity, and we'll see what happens. And the goal, we were like, okay, 5 people perform, and they all bring their girlfriend or boyfriend. That's 10 people in the audience. This is going to be awesome. 100 people showed up the first time, and we made $500 that we gave away to the shelter house. More importantly, at the end of that event, people came up to us and said, are you going to do this again? Because we'd like to perform. This started the Composing Charity series, which was the James Gang's first endeavor. The James Gang became a loose association of people that wasn't even a student organization or a company or a business. We were like a clandestine group of people that just wanted to do good in our community. But in the process of building, we found another problem, and that problem was that there is not enough venues in this town for artists who are just starting to perform. I don't know if that problem still exists, but it was a big problem. And there was this guy, his name was Paul Rust. I don't know if anyone knows Paul Rust, but Paul was a student here. He was very popular in that he performed at No Shame Theater, and everybody loved Paul, and Paul wrote a play. But he wrote a play outside the context of the theater department in class. And when he went to the theater department and said, hey, I'd like to perform in the theater building, they said, it's not for a class. I'm sorry, we can't allow that. So Paul came to us and said, I've got this play. I really need to perform it. I promise you it will be funny. Can you help me find a venue? Well, we hung out a lot at the Deadwood. It's a bar downtown, if you don't know where those bars are. And at that bar, there was a space above it that no one used. Actually, to this day, I don't think it's used for much anymore. And we knew the owner of the bar because we spent a lot of time there. And we said, Jim, hey, there's a space up there. Could we use it and put on a play? Jim said, what are you talking about? We said, it's great. It'll be awesome. But the thing is, we'll send everyone that goes to the play downstairs to the bar when it's over. And he said, I love that idea. And so we went and Paul did his play, and the goal was like, God, if 10 people show up, this is going to be awesome because we got to buy at least 10 beers. Well, about 50 people showed up, and the play was awesome. It was so awesome, and the thing to get them down to the bar totally worked. So we went to Jim and said, hey, Jim, could we do this again tomorrow? He said, sure. So we did it again, and more people showed up. So he said, how about next week? Could we do it Friday and Saturday? And he said, well, that would be awesome. And then we said, well, could we bring someone else with another play, and then could we hang some art on the wall? And then maybe could we do it Thursday, Friday, and Saturday? And well, Sunday, if you're not going to use the space and you don't really mind. And he said, well, sure. And out of that came this idea of this place called Public Space 1, which still exists today over in the Wesley Center. It's a place for emerging artists to perform where there's very little risk to find a stage, but to find your place to begin your work or your act of being creative. So the 10,000 hours, so after Public Space 1, let me say this, after Public Space 1, Paul went on to become famous, and he was in this movie, I Love You, Beth Cooper, and I just hope that maybe everyone can appreciate that Iowa City was the breeding ground where Paul got to do his plays and act, and it's a place like this where ideas can flow, that folks like Paul can succeed. Paul is now writing the new Pee Wee Herman movie. So Pee Wee Herman is spreading, I don't know if there's an idea we're spreading. So then we came across another problem, and this problem is actually a really big problem, is there wasn't enough opportunities to volunteer in our community, and students had a big problem connecting with nonprofits that needed volunteers, and so two guys came up with a crazy idea. What if we did a concert? And it was just a concert by a nationally known performing artist, but the only way to get in was to do 10 hours of community service. And if we could just get 1,000 people to do 10 hours of community service, well, we'd have 10,000 hours of community service, and it took 2 years and about 50 or 60 students just like you who said, we're going to try to make this happen, and it was birthed at the University of Iowa. Eventually, it got so big, it was in 3 cities in Iowa, and people called from across the country and said, please bring the 10,000-hour show to my school. And we said, we're just a small nonprofit, and we don't have enough people. So we sold the whole thing to the United Way of the World for $1. And it's now one of their engagement tools for youth around the country. And they actually took one of our members who founded the 10,000-hour show with them to DC, and Mike now works as one of their executives in the office. He solved a problem for our community, and ultimately, now he's solving the problem for communities around the world. So the 10,000-hour first show was Ben Folds. There's been 8 or 9 since. It's been an amazing experience to watch that grow. The James Gang, 4 years after we started, it became a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on social entrepreneurial incubation. How do you make community ideas happen? In 2006, the James Gang was now named the Press Citizen, the Iowa City Press Citizen Person of the Year for having the largest impact on the community. But when we were back to the question of what do we want to do, did we say we want to build a social entrepreneurial incubator and we want to be on the front page of the paper and we want to be the Person of the Year? No, we didn't plan any of that. That wasn't in the schedule. We just tried to solve a problem that was sitting in front of us, and it led us down a path. And since then, the James Gang has gone on to produce dozens of endeavors that solve problems across our community. You may be familiar with some of the bigger ones. Mission Creek Music Festival and the Iowa Youth Writers Project are just 2. But the James Gang ultimately exists because a bunch of young people tried to solve problems in our community. So what problem do you want to solve? It could be a big problem like world hunger, but it could be a small problem like there's not enough places to volunteer in our community. I want to close with this idea that college is simultaneously the best and the worst place to try to find that problem you want to solve. It is the worst place because college tries to define you singularly. It tries to define you as your major. This is the one thing that you do, but to solve problems, you need all sorts of skills. So if you stick in a traditional college mindset, well, you're not going to have all the skills you need. But college is an amazing time to try things. In a fairly risk-free environment, and there's a density of resources and people around you that can help you try to solve your problems. So again, what problem do you want to solve? And I'll close with this. The James Gang is an interesting name, and everyone says, why is it called the James Gang? We were nerdy honor students when we started it, and it's a reference to a guy, William James. William James is a philosopher who came up with the theory of pragmatism. The theory of pragmatism says that an idea does not have a worth until it's put into action for the purposes of the James Gang. We simply mean, instead of just sitting around talking about ideas, you should get out and make them happen. Thank you very much. On Iowa, and go Hawks.